Excuse me, sir. You go by the name Logan?
Thanks for the whiskey, but I ain't interested.
The hell is this? Where am I?
I'm in the corner.
The door keeps squeak, or I'm gonna break your pencil.
Certainly is a fighter, isn't he? He'll need to be.
Cornelius, Senior Scientist, Oakland Lake Facility. Date April 24th, 1982, 8:12 a.m. Pacific Time. Test subject James Howlett, also known as Logan. Species human mutant. The question on whether or not a mutant is considered to be human is difficult to say at this time. As far as we know, mutants have been among us since the mid-1300s. Perhaps even further back. Until further confirmation, there are no specific rights for mutants protecting them from unorthodox experimentation should it align with the interests of the United States of America. As dangerous as they may be, I personally do find them to be a fascinating subject in the field of biological research. Whether or not these mutants truly are the next evolutionary step for the Homo sapien, or some form of tampering of the supernatural. Whatever the case, as of now, since we have a vast selection of gifted individuals at Oakland Lake, we have a plethora of new opportunities and discoveries that we have yet to think of. Today will be the first of said opportunities, in the form of bonding a recently rediscovered element, named adamantium, to the human skeletal structure. Under the orders of the head director, the project has been officially referred to as the Weapon X program. In theory, the bonding of this incredibly durable metal is an extreme process to commit to, but not impossible. The head director of this program, Colonel William Stryker, believes this experiment to be successful via a means of the rapid regeneration of human tissue. Fortunately, we have recently come under the possession of just that in the form of a Mr. James Howlett, a mutant with the ability to rapidly generate new cells to replace ones lost from damage. In other words, Mr. Howlett can regenerate any and all damage to his body thanks to his unique mutation. Because of this, Mr. Howlett has been alive for a very long time. Our team has traced his birth to be anywhere between 1790 and 1815, due mostly in part to historical records placing him at the scene of American and Canadian historical wars after 1815. Though he may be the perfect candidate for this project, our research team is unconvinced that Mr. Howlett, even with his specific mutation, would be able to survive the bonding process. Further experimentation will be required to test the limits of Mr. Howlett's healing factor before we can begin with the procedure. Dr. Abraham Cornelius, Senior Scientist, Alkali Lake Facility, signing off. Dr. Abraham Cornelius, Senior Scientist, Oakland Lake Facility. Date May 17th, 1982, 8:12 a.m. Pacific Time. Test subject James Howlett, also known as Logan. Species human mutant. Our clinical research team is currently going through in vivo rodent trials. It is testing a newly developed enhancement steroid for Mr. Howlett's healing factor in preparation for the adamantium bonding process. Before we can start human trials, we must first rehearse how to properly conduct testing on Mr. Howlett's body. Getting him to cooperate calmly has been quite problematic. For a man of his stature, he is much stronger than we had anticipated. However, like any other man, Mr. Howlett is just as susceptible to electricity as the rest of us. We must diligently employ the use of cattle prods and tasers around him, or else we risk severe injury to our personnel. Rest assured, Mr. Howlett will cooperate with the program just as scheduled. Dr. Abraham Cornelius, Senior Scientist, Aukley Lake Facility, signing off. Dr. Abraham Cornelius, Senior Scientist, Aukley Lake Facility. Date May 30th, 1982, 8:36 p.m. Pacific Time. Test subject James Howlett, also known as Logan. Species human mutant. Our clinical team has recently developed a serum that we believe would increase Mr. Howlett's healing factor to withstand the bonding of adamantium to his skeletal anatomy. The clinical team has taken the liberty in naming this formula the X Serum in reference to the Weapon X program. The creation process and formula has been declared classified for the record under the orders of Colonel William Stryker until further notice. For the time being, after the completion and testing of the X Serum on mice and rats to be a success, we have now moved on to human trials. At 1:30 p.m., we injected Mr. Howlett with 10 cc's of the X Serum. Every 10 minutes, we would inflict sizable lacerations into Mr. Howlett's superficial muscle tissue in order to avoid any visceral and potentially lethal damage. The X Serum proved to be the success we were looking for, healing Mr. Howlett's wounds almost immediately, but only for so long. The effects of the X Serum seemed to only last for about an hour before the booster's effect wore off and Mr. Howlett's healing factor returned to its original state. The clinical team theorizes that multiple injections will prove beneficial to the program's goal of withstanding the process of bonding adamantium to bone. Following the principles of mithridatism, the body will over time create a resistance to the effects of the poison if applied in consistent and controlled doses. However, research suggests that the opposite effect can occur in the human body as well. Regardless, the science department has unanimously agreed that, due to Mr. Howlett's mutation, his body will accept the X Serum in time to enhance the cells he produces to regenerate muscle tissue at an even faster pace. Daily doses will be supplied and increased until we see signs of Mr. Howlett's mutation progress beneficially. Dr. Abraham Cornelius, Senior Scientist, Aukley Lake Facility, signing off. Dr. Abraham Cornelius, Senior Scientist, Aukley Lake Facility. Date June 17, 1982, 6:38 p.m. Pacific Time. Test subject James Howlett, also known as Logan. Species human mutant. For the past 10 days, we have seen some incredible results. Just as theorized, Mr. Howlett's body has completely accepted the X Serum as a booster for his mutation. Within 5 weeks, Mr. Howlett's cells have permanently altered faster than we had anticipated. Initially, we had hypothesized that, should Mr. Howlett's cells accept the X Serum, we would see success within the span of 2 years, a year and a half for a best-case scenario. Yet, Mr. Howlett's genetic makeup has taken us by surprise repeatedly. Within 1 week of a 10 cc daily dose, the duration of the X Serum ranged from an hour to 2.5 hours. The second week, we increased the dosage to 25 cc's of the X Serum. This resulted in an exponential increase, where the effects of the X Serum lasted between 4 to 5.5 hours. We have since moved from non-critical inflictions to highly critical areas, such as vital arteries and air passageways. Both areas proved successful in near-immediate cell regeneration. On the third week, we saw an increase in the effects of the X Serum lasting up to 7 hours. From there, we moved on to inflicting lacerations into deep muscle and skeleton tissue. Like earlier trials, the results of almost immediate regeneration were astonishing. By week 4, we had moved on to inflicting wounds through the use of firearms and explosives.
No, please.
Amazingly, Mr. Howlett was able to regenerate missing limbs within minutes when introduced to a contained explosion from 280 millimeters of C4. As for the firearms, Mr. Howlett's body was able to expel all of the bullets that were fired into him within seconds. Near the beginning of week 5, we began 24-hour procedures of inflictions every 10 minutes of random acts of violence. Finally, showing no signs of the X Serum's effect wearing off for 3 days straight, we had come to the conclusion that the enhancement of Mr. Howlett's healing factor was an unexpected but resounding success. The clinical team has decided on 3 more days of regeneration stress testing before confirming our success to the Colonel. Dr. Abraham Cornelius, Senior Scientist, Alkali Lake Facility, signing off. Dr. Abraham Cornelius, Senior Scientist, Alkali Lake Facility. Date June 30th, 1982, 2:04 p.m. Pacific Time. Test subject James Howlett, also known as Logan. Species human mutant. I have recently informed Colonel Stryker of our progress in enhancing Mr. Howlett's healing factor. Before we can officially start the adamantium bonding procedure, Colonel Stryker has requested a series of trials based on Mr. Howlett's endurance, strength, and stamina. Surprisingly, I had thought of this myself, but not quite in the way Colonel Stryker had suggested. The director has recruited another mutant to volunteer in these trials. In fact, this volunteer, going by the name of Victor Creed, or the moniker Sabretooth, has a very similar genetic makeup to Mr. Howlett. Although I may have failed to mention the full range of Mr. Howlett's abilities, Mr. Creed and Mr. Howlett both share an enhanced healing factor and heightened senses, especially in hearing and smell. Further research will be conducted on whether their other senses are enhanced as well. In the meantime, Mr. Creed, by orders of Colonel Stryker, will be tasked in testing Mr. Howlett's newfound abilities granted to him by the X Serum, by means of physical combat. We will be starting combat trials tomorrow with Mr. Creed and Mr. Howlett contained within an enclosed environment. Dr. Abraham Cornelius, Senior Scientist, Alkali Lake Facility, signing off.